Okay, so this work also had a lot of help from a lot of interested parties, and some, or hopefully most or all of them, are listed here on the slide. So why are we here today, and what is this MOOC thing? Has anybody, raise your hand in this room if you have taken a MOOC. Ooh, very impressive. All right, good for you. Raise your hand if you've taken a Michigan MOOC. Some, not all of you. Some of you have been taking them elsewhere. That's okay. There's a lot of MOOCs out there. So we're going to talk about what we've been doing here at Michigan with MOOCs. And the first thing I wanted to start with is this is the hype cycle. I think many of you are familiar with this. Whenever there is a sort of new technology on the market, this is typically what happens. And so you could ask yourself, where are we in the MOOC hype cycle? Or you can see some of the terms there. What do you think? Anyone? Shout them out.
I think we're headed for the trough.
We're headed for the trough. I think you're right. Right now, there are subcategories on that line. Here they are. I know you can't read them all, but activity beyond early adopters, we definitely hit that. We're starting get negative press starts, right? Are you starting to see more of those kind of articles now? Supplier consolidation and failure, that's definitely happening. We know last week Dan Russell talked about how Google is partnered up with edX. And so on the way down here, there's where the venture capital, additional venture capital comes in. Less than 5% of the potential audience is fully adopted. But what I want to say about this is I think we're already here at Michigan in this label. Not necessarily this place on the curve, but what I think is great about Michigan is we are applying this back here and not waiting for that trough of disillusionment to really come full-fledged. So this is methodologies and best practices developing. And that's really why we're looking at this data and where we hope to get to. This is a little graph showing how the press has been oriented toward MOOCs, and you can see it's going up and up. And can you open the Chronicle of Higher Ed without at least one article on MOOCs right now? I don't think so. Michigan announced its partnership with Coursera in April of 2013. So that was over here somewhere. 2013. 2012. Right. So right about there. So what we're going to talk about today is what we know about MOOCs at Michigan, what we know about the users of them, what we know about how those users are becoming engaged with the MOOCs, and then we have some information from a survey that we have more recently been able to administer to the people who took the Michigan MOOCs. So let's back up a minute with history. So here it was. We were one of the first 4 institutions to join Coursera. We did this in April 2012. And the first course was offered was Scott Page's Model Thinking course, which was launched then in the spring of 2012. Princeton, Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, now Coursera, we're early joiners too, and now Coursera has, I think, 81 institutional partners. And the important thing to know about the way Coursera courses are offered is they're offered in sessions, which are kind of like a semester, right? A start to finish. And we here at Michigan have about 3 sessions that we run. In October, there's some courses that start. Roughly in February, there's some courses that start. And then in May, some courses that start. So we kind of have a fall, winter, and spring term. I'm talking mostly about our campus. The medical campus is getting more into this, and they're doing some of their own things with regard to that. Here's a list of the courses in the first iterations of the Michigan MOOCs, and you can look them up on the Coursera website. And for those very few of you who have not taken a MOOC, I wanted to just quickly show you what the interface looks like. So here's Gautam Kaul's, the homepage of his finance course, which has been offered, I think, 3 times now. And you can see here that one thing to notice is this button here, Enroll for Free. This is what you hear all the hype about. But you can also enroll for a signature track. That's going to now cost you a little money and gives you a different kind of certificate of achievement. And I can show you what one of those looks like. And you can add it to a watch list if you want to know when's Gautam's next class going to start up. It will ping you and let you know. You also see we got a little social media action going on over here, being liked on Facebook pages and the usual social media stuff. The thing to note about when you're in Coursera is you've got a list of tools over here. Anyone who's been on C-Tools, this is very familiar. Some of these are direct links to the course syllabus or the course schedule. Documents is like our resources. Assignments, of course, are obvious. Video lectures, that's the main component, right? This is the thing about what MOOCs are, because they look like this. So this is the kind of screen that you get. You get the talking head, you get the PowerPoint slides, and this is the thing that you watch when on a weekly basis, or not, which we'll talk about. And you can see here, here's a list of video lectures, and you can click on them to open them. This is a screenshot that we took this morning from a previous class, which is why the list is long. But usually a class releases the videos on the schedule, and so this list gets longer as the time goes on, but you can go back and click and rewatch a video. The assignment is the other important component of the MOOC. So they are generally like this. They are multiple choice questions. But the other thing to note is this, in the assignment list and this warning that you get, is that if you submit any time after the hard deadline, you will not receive credit. And because we opened this assignment after the course had closed, it reminds me of this here too. I can take this exam, or this assignment, I can see how I scored, but it's not going to give me credit for having done that, and I can't earn credit from the course after the fact for doing this later. At this point in time with the structure of this particular course. And when you're done, if you have completed all the assignments and scored above a certain threshold, which I think is generally about 70%, then you will get a Coursera certificate of accomplishment. Some courses also offer a distinction, certificate with distinction, kind of like honors, I guess, or something. And then if you use this new thing and pay the extra money, you get a different statement of accomplishment that is in the signature track, which has a mechanism that allegedly verifies your identity when you take those. And they do it with photo recognition and your camera on your thing. So there's some attempt, if you're getting this other kind of certificate, to assure someone who might care that you have the certificate that you actually really took it. So our questions when we got the data were these. We wanted to know who's taken the Michigan MOOCs, what does their participation look like, and what are the students' perceptions about their experience in these MOOCs. And so ultimately then what we want to do with some of the answers to these questions is think about how we can inform best practices for online teaching and learning at this massive scale, but also think about, are there lessons to be learned there that we can take back on campus? Is there a way to blend some of the experience of the online with the on campus, and see what we can learn from doing so. Before I get into the data with you, I want to be clear about where the data comes from. We have primarily two kinds of data. We have the user log data. That's the click data that Coursera captures for us, everything the student does in there. And that data they send to us, and we deliver it to ITS. They put it in our warehouse, and then we do what we need to do with the data. Eric has written some scripts that help make that data easier to analyze, which we've made available to the larger community. We put them up on GitHub, so other people downloading their Coursera data can have a little easier time taking the raw data and turning it into something you can analyze. And so we can know what they did, we can know their class performance, although remember, don't be mistaken, we don't have grades, right? Remember, this is relatively binary outcome. They either get a certificate or they don't, and then for some courses, a certificate with distinction. So unlike some of the analytics we do where we correlate activities with GPA, that's off the table here, we can't do that. We also can, in most cases, know their IP address, so we might know where these users are located. And they also have an email address, so we can look at that as well. Now, we also have survey data. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Stephanie, does the course performance data include percentage correct or how many times they attempted?
Yes, we can do that. So we can do a more fine-grained analysis of performance in that way, which would be very interesting to do, but we haven't yet drilled down in the data at that level. And then we would have to norm it for that class, of course, too, right? So the survey, we did some surveys at the in the early term. Coursera administers those. There's kind of spotty. People take those if they want or not. We get some demographic information from that. And then we've continued to work on the post-course survey, which we send out to everybody who had registered for the course and get back and encourage them to fill it out even if they hadn't completed the course. And so we get responses back from some of those. And we've added a course evaluation component to that. As you'll see, I have some data. We've replicated the standard Q1 through Q4 questions on this, and you'll see what we get when we've done that. Okay, so who's been taking Michigan MOOC courses? Grand total for the courses that we've analyzed, what goes up to and includes the winter 2013 courses, you've got 666,407 registered users of Michigan MOOCs. Big number, that's that massive number, right? This is the kind of scale that people get all excited about when they talk about MOOCs. And the average number of students registered per course, you can see here is 55, and you can see there's variability in the size of these courses, how many users are attracted by them. Securing Digital Democracy had almost 20,000, but Gotham's Intro to Finance at its peak had 125,000. So they can vary in size. You can also see that here. So the data that I'm talking about today, when I'm talking about log data, includes the first course we offered, which was Scott Page's course in the winter of 2012. Then the fall of 2012, we had 6 courses, and there's the model thinking course again, and adding the other courses I showed you on the list. And then the winter 2013, where one of the classes wasn't taught then, but is taught later. And you can see that Gotham's course had a peak here and went down a little bit. You can see model thinking went from this size to this size, but then shrank down a bit. So you get a sense of the relative proportion of the number of students who take these courses. Yes, Jim?
With the exception of the first offering, every course has lower enrollment the second time it's offered. Is that typical of most of the MOOCs?
Who can say what's typical right now, right? So we now have a couple of other semesters past this data, but we didn't, for the analysis we're talking about today, we didn't have access to all of that data yet. Some of them, I mean, to get it from Coursera, to get it to ITS, to get it cleaned up and loaded. So we can ask that question about Michigan soon. Like this course that it wasn't, where we skipped a block here, it has been offered more recently. So does the number, I guess, which one is it? This one? The Securing Digital Democracy. Maybe the line goes up because people didn't get a chance to take it again soon. So we'll see, but that's a very good question. All right, now when I told you how many, that 677,000, that was anybody who registered. If you look and see, did anybody register for more than one class, and we think about them as a user, it's a somewhat lower number because almost 170,000 people have taken more than one class at Michigan. So they do come back for more. And of the users that we can identify, we can tell you about where 70% of them live, looking at their IP address. And here's what that looks like. So by and large, it's, as you might expect, most of the users are here in the US. When I hear people talk about MOOCs, and Dan Russell did this last week, they talk about the kid in India or the kid, you know. So yeah, we got 9% of our users are in India and 5% are in Brazil. I think in the Google data those were flipped, but you can see these are all relatively small proportions against the largest number, the third, really about a third who are from the US.
Question.
Yes.
these classes are all just offered in English.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. So you have to be reasonably competent English, at least your recognition of the language. And if you're going to take the test, they're multiple choice. You don't have to write anything by and large. So I think Melissa is next, and then Connie.
Naive question, why can't you get geolocation on 100% of the IP address?
Why can't we get geolocation on 100%, Eric?
So the log data, it has the last access IP. So the last time the user logged in, if they had an IP, it would go there. But then some people can register but never even go into the class, so they wouldn't have an IP address associated with it.
So we have the IP address for the people who did more than just simply register. Connie?
I know that a bunch of Coursera and other MOOC courses have been translated by people in other countries. Do we know whether that has happened to any of the U of M courses?
Tim O'Brien, do we know? Has anybody translated these courses and offered them in another language?
So we've got a partnership going on with a company in China now that it's actually a hosting company in China. A lot of stuff is being converted into Mandarin. There have also been some corporate sponsorships of some other translations. I'd have to look to get all the details, but I know Portuguese was one. Right now it's just a handful of courses, so it is Model Thinking and Introduction to Finance were the first two, then others are happening. I think all of our courses will be translated into Chinese. In fact, I just was contacted about doing intro videos for the Chinese students.
Is that true just for U of M courses, or is this a Coursera partnership?
Well, initially they used a transcription service that allowed students to do crowdsourced transcription, but it was very hit and miss, and the English language delivery from that company was pretty poor, and so Coursera decided to stop working with them, and so now they only give us free English language transcription, and all of the other languages are based on this new model where they're trying to get companies to fund it.
Yes.
So, in the previous slide, when you said close to about 700,000 people have registered, and then the next slide we were talking about, you can only represent maybe about 50% of those. So does that mean that those who registered didn't actually view the courses?
Hold on, I want to get to that data. I've got some more, but I just wanted to give you a quick view of where these users are. So they're in the US. About 4% of them are in Michigan. 21% are in California. You might ask, why is that? We don't know, except it is the Coursera home base, and Silicon Valley is there. Maybe they're just more visible there. But that's where the largest percentage of the users are coming from, and then New York and the East Coast. For University of Michigan users, we found 941 people who had @umich.edu addresses. And you can see the breakdown. We could identify who were current students, who were alums, staff, and faculty. So a bunch of you raised your hand that you had taken Michigan MOOC, so maybe you're one of these people. Males versus females, this is something that people are interested in. You can see that we've got about 2/3 male to 1/3 female. But we did what Dan Russell did, and we broke it down by course. So you imagine by course content, there might be a different appeal to men versus women. So what Steve did is he went to the course catalog and looked at his best guess for what a comparable U of M course that relates to the content of the MOOC course. So digital democracy, the MOOC attracted more women to this topic compared to men. Social network analysis. Oh, I said that wrong, didn't I?
Comparing
There are more women in the MOOC class than in the residential campus. There are more women on campus than in the MOOC for the social network analysis, model thinking, here's intro to finance, and so forth. So you can see that there is a variability in how many women come to the class, and it does have a different appeal. Sometimes the online course is attracting more women than the traditional residence-based class is. In terms of race, here's the demographics for what we can know about race, and these are the Coursera categories. This is the survey that they put out. So we can't match those up exactly to the University of Michigan campus students, but you'll note that it's predominantly white, and I think it's 60% white here on campus, so that part is the same. We have different categories, including international, so that makes it hard to sort of to say, are these numbers significantly different? But I think what we do know is that there are more who identify, let's see, Hispanic in this than there is on campus. Schooling, who comes to these courses? There is, again, I think, this common idea about MOOCs that they're reaching people who don't otherwise have access to higher education. But in fact, when we look at who's using our MOOCs, they are people who already have experience and degrees from more traditional-based higher education. So they're not the people, by and large, they're not the people who otherwise couldn't go to college or didn't go to college, at least for the Michigan courses here. And of the people who are taking this course while they're a student, not very many of them. Most people do this when they're not currently enrolled as being a student in some other way. And similarly, who's taking it? Mostly people who are employed full-time. So they're doing this in their spare time, and we can think about whether that has implications for the participation rate. So let's get to that part then. So this is where we have to think about how we want to define engagement. So here's the thing that everybody says about MOOCs. You get this huge, huge drop-off. So we had the 667,000 people who registered for a class. 62% of those never show up in the first week of class. They register, they never get there. 38% of students watch or download at least one lecture during the course. So that's the number that we're going to use going forward. We are going to call those people engaged users. And we're going to forget about all those other people who are curious or well-intentioned but never showed up even once. So in the data that I'm going to present to you today, I'm only going to talk about this 38% of students who we're going to call engaged users. Okay, now, of those, yes?
So in a typical class, how many lectures are there, just to get a sense of...
Okay, that's a very good question, and it is important. Some classes, we had one class that was a 5-week class. We had an 8-week and a couple 9 weeks and some 10-week classes. So what we're going to do is categorize these users, and I will get back to that in a second. Because what we did was we broke the course length into what we call blocks, which are roughly equivalent to a session. And especially because for assessments, most courses, if you didn't take the assessment during the right time, you couldn't get credit for it. So we're going to call somebody a student who got graded if in that block they showed up, they watched the video, they took the assessment. We're going to call them auditing concurrent if they showed up and watched the video in that particular week but didn't happen to do the assessment. So auditing, that's like a student who audits your class who shows up all the time but doesn't get graded. We also have this artifact, because this is all digital, that you can go in, you can register for the course, ignore it the whole run of the course, show up before the course closes, and download all the videos. So we're going to call those auditors delayed. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know if they ever watch them, but at least at some point they had enough interest to go download all those videos to do whatever with them later. So we're going to keep track of them too. We're going to call them auditing delayed. And then we have the students who are dropped. So these are students who had showed up for the first session, but some point over time stopped showing up. And that means stopped watching the video and stopped taking the assessments. We have very few people who were graded who dropped to an audit. If you drop, you tend to drop from the condition that you started in the first or second block. So let me show you. This answers the question about blocks, about how long the courses are. Here's what you really want to see. So remember, this graph, we are forgetting about all those people who never showed up on the first day. Here's the first day. So to get on this chart, you had to do something here. And these are the graded students on the first day who showed up for the class and took the assessment. And then you've got your 2 forms of auditing. Now it's a little bit tricky. You have to remember this light blue line, this auditing delay, we've graphed it over time, but by and large, they're getting credit for this by doing it somewhere down here before the class closes, right? Because you could go and you could decide only to grab the first lecture or 2, but most people who do this delayed auditing tend to grab all the videos. So their line is here, and the auditing concurrent is the blue line. So there's several things that you can notice about this. It basically, whatever you're going to do by about course 3, session 3, is pretty much who you are throughout. You get an increase in the people dropping over time, but if you're a graded student, you're pretty much hanging in there if you make it through the first few weeks of the course. And if you're auditing and you are doing it in sync with the course, again, you pretty much stay in there through the length of the course. Now you might ask, for the shorter courses, is the pattern different? And does someone's behavior in the last week of a 5-week session look like someone's behavior in the last week of a 10-week session? And the answer is no. And Dan Russell mentioned this last week as well. Doesn't matter how long the course is, the longer the course, the more eventual dropout you get. The students who are represented in here in that 5-week class, that's pretty much where they were. They didn't drop out sooner because it was a 5-week class. People drop out of week 6 or week 7 because it's week 6 or week 7. Overall, so we look at those graded, because those are the people who are bucking for a certificate, right? 86% of them, on average, if you were in that graded line and you were hanging in there, you were pretty probably likely to get a certificate of accomplishment. Now there is some variation from class to class. Social network analysis had 68%, so if you hung in there and took them all and took all those quizzes, the quarter of people maybe didn't get over the 70% threshold, as opposed to this course where the exams were easier, I guess, to achieve the 70%. So you could think about, is a MOOC a hard MOOC on 2 dimensions? The length, because we know the longer it goes, the less likely you're going to be to stick it out. And by looking at the proportion of people who do stick it out, who get above the 70% threshold. So, okay, so what do we know about how these people felt about their MOOC experience? So this is what we did. I told you we did a survey, and we added a bunch of questions, and we refined some existing surveys that were kind of out there in the community. And we sent it out to anybody who registered for the course, because that's the mailing list that was available to us. We didn't pre-select for these engaged users, but, and in fact, we got about 600 people. We said clearly up front, you do not have to have completed the course to fill out the survey, because we wanted to find out something about these dropped people. But even those people who just registered and never showed up, 600 of them still filled out our survey. We took them out of the data, because I don't know, you'll see what these questions are. I don't know how to make sense of their answers. Maybe we'll have a little fun and see what they're telling us, but it's kind of hard to rate the class when all you did is register for it. So we threw them out, and what we were left with are these students here. And you can see, by and large, you were more likely to answer a survey if you were one of these graded people, which is great, because then we know what they think about their experience. But I was also happy to have some representatives of this auditing concurrent, the auditing delayed, and the drop people, because we want to know what they're thinking about as well. Okay, so there's our standard questions. And you can see from these numbers, even no matter if you were graded or auditing or even dropped, people are happy with this experience. And these numbers for these questions, if you remember a couple weeks ago when Mika presented, these are higher numbers than our average course ratings here on campus. These students are pretty happy about their experience if they earned a certificate or not. The question we added, because I'm very curious about this, what makes you happy for taking a MOOC? When people talk about MOOCs, and they're always talking about the low percent who get a certificate versus the hundreds of thousands who register, But that assumes that everybody registers to get a certificate. And we can see how many auditors there are. And we can see that, yes, the people who got graded are saying that they achieved their goals. But this is not neutral, right? This is the not the very satisfied, but the satisfied. So, and there's no difference between these three. So something's going on here that the people who are in it just to get access to the course material are, they're okay with it. Questions about these numbers? Comments? Jared?
It's really interesting to me that it sounds like a bunch of people who never even showed up for the class even took this survey. And it's really interesting to me that if it's true, I'm trying to understand this question about survey bias. Like, when people see a line that's this long and they click in the middle of it somewhere, or they click near the top, like, what? It's really amazing that these numbers are so flat in these 4 years.
Well, I know we have a person in the lab who's from the survey methodology program at ISR, and she talks about straight lining. And we can go in and for these blocks of answers and look and see whether there's ways to detect patterns that suggest that someone really just wasn't all that invested in the survey. And we could compare the quality of the survey answers for these 666 people who never took the course versus these others. And that's something interesting that we can do. But for right now, it looks, I don't think you straight line on 4s necessarily any more than you would on the regular course evaluation. What I think is interesting is look how consistent the numbers are for the instructor. So what this tells me is people are not dropping because they thought it was a crappy course or because they didn't like the instructor. These numbers are pretty similar to the people who hung in there the whole time. Rachel.
So I don't know that this is a question, but I'm mystified that I had a strong desire to take this course in something which is completely optional, that people are clicking up is the lowest number of the 4 questions on average, or almost below it. It's tied with, I learned a great deal from this course. I mean, I was wondering if there are open-ended questions on the survey, whether you gleaned anything about why that wasn't closer to 5s. I mean, if you're actually going to register for a completely optional extracurricular thing that you're doing in your free time, why isn't your desire stronger?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's not as strong as much as they liked it once they got there, right? Didn't it? Right? It's interesting. These numbers are statistically significant, some of them, but this size is huge, and we want to do the post hoc comparisons. But by and large, this is what they're saying about their overall impression of the course when they're done. Yes.
Do the numbers change if you're looking at folks that wanted a certificate, or what's the other, the signature certificate?
The distinction?
Yeah.
We don't have that option for all courses, and that's something we can pull out later, the people who got distinction versus the sense of accomplishment. We can find the courses that had that option and pull them out. It's a good question.
Because I was wondering if there may be folks that that didn't finish or so forth, they had a strong desire. They didn't have that strong desire to take it. Maybe they felt they had a strong need to take it.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And now that there's an option to take some of these and pay for it and get this whole verified thing, it'd be very interesting to look at some of these numbers for the people who paid for the experience versus the people who got it for free, because it's the same course. But what you get when the end of it is done is different. Yes?
I think you said that there were some comparisons earlier between a course that's actually on campus in person.
Yeah.
With these classes, were the evaluations?
That's a good question. So we did that seat of the pants last night, late, and didn't go to the history of the course evaluations to pull that up and look at the difference, but that's something interesting to look at. It's only our kind of our best matching too for these courses, and sometimes we tried to control for instructors. So if somebody like Scott, who offers this course on campus, took this course and made a version of the MOOC, then it's a pretty good one-to-one analysis versus some of these other courses where we just had to say, well, this course is pretty similar. It's not the same instructor, but it's offered in a unit. That's, it was just sort of seat of our pants the best we could do to grab those, but it would be good to know. Was there another question before I go on? No? Yes.
Yeah, in terms of that comparison, I'd just be a little careful as to, even if the instructor was the same, how similar was the course?
Oh, absolutely. Well, they're very different,
I just
right?
think that could be a tricky
Absolutely.
Very misleading.
Absolutely. Nope, you're right. You're absolutely right. Course materials. We're sort of curious about what were people liking about this MOOC experience, and these are the basic things that you could do in the MOOC. You can, not surprisingly, because the video is the main form of it, that's a thing that they like the best. Here's where things get ugly. Discussion forums. Now, this is interesting because, well, one, because when you hear about MOOCs, another hype thing you hear about is all the study groups that students are self-organizing and all the ways that the peers are finding each other and working together on the course material. But it's also true that these discussion forums are not well used in the MOOCs, just like they're not well used here on campus. So apparently the students are unhappy either with the way they were used or how little they were used or the fact that they weren't used. But in particular, this just doesn't look good. And I felt connected with the instructor through the pre-recorded lecture. You can see those people who delayed, the auditor delayed. That number is lower. We don't, did they ever even open them yet, or did they open a couple of them? I mean, so the immediacy of it, the being there when it's being offered, at the time it's being offered, seems to give you a better sense of connection with the instructor, but that makes sense.
Is
Joe?
not applicable an answer choice to these questions?
I think we would have put that on there. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah.
If people who aren't using the form are giving it a low score, just checking not applicable.
Yeah, we can go back and check, but we're usually pretty careful with that in our survey design. I just don't have the instrument in front of me. If we didn't do that, shame on us, and we definitely have to make that change. This is what, when you have somebody who gets their degree from ISR in your research group, it's awesome. So getting back to oh, I'm sorry.
This is a new area for me. Do the faculty touch in at all at the discussion forums, or no? Is it just only students?
That's completely up to them, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, some faculty interact with the discussion forums. It's really pretty onerous to try and have them be very involved in the discussion forums. What we try to do instead is have their student assistants who manage the discussion forums and help manage the courses. They go through and look for questions that have had a lot of votes or a lot of views, and then they'll run those by the faculty members and get a definitive answer and post that as sort of a statement. Sometimes we'll post those and pin them to the top of the discussion forum and lock them, so it's kind of like, this is our stance on this, and that's pretty common.
Thank you.
So going back to the peer thing, right, it's not happening. These numbers, the scale represents not at all to frequently. So, and we gave them lots of options. We wanted to know where, who are you connecting with? How are you connecting with them? No, they're not. That's not happening for the Michigan courses so far. Workload, we wanted thinking about Bill's work, about how many hours students study. There's generally they say 5. Here's how they view the course load. And this is a scale from very light to very heavy. So they're right there pretty much in the middle of that. And again, it doesn't really matter much what category you are, if you were one of the engaged, the graded students versus the other. So I think we're hitting expectation for that. And it also tells me here, these students who are dropping, this is a little bit heavier, but they're dropping because they perhaps are getting behind or having trouble with keeping up a little bit more often, but not really a lot. There was a question over here?
Yeah, so this is just taking a step back for a minute. The discussion forums, the student assistants, do the students enrolled in this course see a face for this student assistant who's helping them through the discussion, or is it just
it's textual?
Or
No, it's textual. They can have an image. I actually recommend that they come up with some kind of alias to use, because the students who take these courses are not very good about following the rules about not contacting faculty or course staff, and so they will send emails to the students and pester them and things if we don't try to protect them. So I I personally think it's a good idea for them to not let them know their real names and not get too personal.
I just wonder if that lack of a face of someone kind of there answering their questions and then having one for the video lectures, maybe that could be.
Yeah, it's a good question. Tim, sounds like, your recommendations at least put a picture up so you look real.
Yeah, and
right.
it doesn't necessarily need to be done, but something.
Yeah. Right. Dog, cat.
Privacy is a concern, I think.
Right, the
You know,
wallet photo.
These people, there are lots of people who do not respect privacy. They will email faculty and harass them. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of the point where we've considered, warning people that will kick them out of the course if they don't stop emailing faculty.
Here's some numbers, some more numbers for you to look at, and I think that they're really, they tell us something about the dropped people in particular. You can see that the people drop because life intervenes, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't satisfied with how they managed their course. They appear in our survey as at least an engaged user at some point in time who then dropped. And why are they dropping? They weren't happy with how they were able to manage their time. That the certificate wasn't the primary motivation. Obviously, for the people who were graded, who mostly got the certificate, they're rating that more highly than the other people. And then some of these other questions are kind of silly. No, that's not as silly as the next one, but anyway, one thing we wanted to know is students have told me sometimes they take a MOOC to see how well prepared they might be for another course. And that seems consistent across the board for all these types of engaged users, as well as some expectation that they learned something, right? So if we don't have a grade, which you could argue whether that's a good proxy for learning or not, but those numbers aren't so bad in terms of thinking about whether people think they got something out of the course. Inspired me to pursue the topic further. That's what a lot of us as faculty members hope for, that students want to stay and learn more. And there's just some other questions that we asked. Did I go forward or backward?
No, that was just a box around those.
Okay, right. Okay. Do you plan to mention it to your future employer or to your future institution? There's some expectation that people will do that. Some people are saying they do that. And then there's some other questions we wanted to follow up with and revisit the course materials in the future. Take the course again. Of course, this is the one that I said is a silly question for these people. If you took it and got graded and got a certificate, of course, why would you take it again? But look, take another course by the same instructor. That's pretty high. Take another course by any University of Michigan instructor. That looks very good too. But we're also having their good experiences bleeding off into other people, getting other institutions' MOOCs, having students go there too, unless students, if you come to a MOOC in the first place because you're willing to take it whenever. But I think this is good news for Michigan and speaks to the fact that we want to be delivering a good MOOC experience to our students. Yes?
We started to parse this out according to demographics of geography. So are foreign students more likely to mention this to future employers?
No, we haven't, but that's a very nice question that we can ask. Jim?
So it's striking that people are far more likely, presumably statistically more likely to take a course from somebody else than from us. Do you think that that's because they're just a small catalog that we have?
We have a small catalog relative to some other institutions. I mean, if you go to the Coursera page, especially now with 81 institutions offering courses there, so that makes it statistically less likely. It's one of a number of courses that you can take. Remember, these data are from our recent Winter 13 course offerings. So this is not influenced by the early adopters, the early courses that we did. There more to say about that in terms of? No. Okay, well let's move. Was there another question over here? No. Oh, that was right. Right, we talked about that. Okay. So there's some insights and some questions, right? So Well, the one is, I think that our data shows us that this whole idea about you take a MOOC because you intend to complete it and get your certificate, we've got some pretty strong evidence, I think, that students are valuing their MOOC experience even without a certificate, and even for those who never even thought about getting a certificate. One question you might ask then is, what implications does this have about grading? And what does it mean for getting, they're not coming to this course so they can show somebody they got an A in the MOOCs course. They're coming to the MOOC if they want to use the certification to say, I learned this material, I had exposure to this, I was engaged with it, I took this course. Yeah, Rachel?
It seems like the comparison to grades is quite accurate, given that so many of the MOOC students already have degrees.
Yes, that's a good point.
And so grades when you're trying to earn a degree versus if you already have what is currently the currency in terms of employment and the certificate, I think, is going to have a different weight than a grade for that population.
Right. So, but I think we have to bear that in mind when we're engaging in the rhetoric about MOOCs offering people access to education who don't otherwise have this access. And I'm going to try to, you've already read these by now while we've been talking, so I'm going to move on because I want to tell you about a couple of next steps that we've got going on in the Use Lab. There was a competition for research grants funded by Gates. They gave out 25. We got 2 at Michigan. Awesome. And so some of the MOOC, continued MOOC analysis we're going to do involves 2 postdocs who here at Michigan, and I want to introduce them to you. The first is Chris Brooks. That's Chris. And he is looking at, as you can see from the title, the relationship between residential students and their MOOC experience. So in other words, something about these students, in part, right? Chris, do you want to say another word or two about?
Yeah, I'm very keen on what alumni, how they use MOOCs, to whether they use them to re-engage with an institution, to continue their engagement, or whether it doesn't matter and they're just using it for some tertiary learning, and whether there's opportunities even potentially for recruitment from MOOCs that are being offered by institutions. So
right.
That's my focus.
Right. If there are people showing up in the MOOCs who aren't as prevalent on our campus, can we bring them here by virtue of identifying them and their interest and their performance in a MOOC? Okay, and the other grant we got, Tawana Dillahunt. You can see she's talking about this issue of whether there are pathways to employment. And so we're looking at some of these people here. Tawana, do you want to say?
Sure. So the plan is to conduct a quantitative analysis to see how people who are unable to afford higher education perform in comparison to others. There's also a qualitative component. We're going to try to speak to these people face to face. We're going to look at those in Michigan. And if we can't talk to, we don't have enough people in Michigan, then we're going to reach out and have Skype, Google Hangout interviews that way to really understand whether or not they're using these MOOCs for employment, how so, and try to understand if there are opportunities to create different classes, more practical courses to help in that effort.
We can also find out some of the price structures for these pay-for courses are $29, $39. That's a pretty relatively low price point, or is it? I don't know. And do people who want to use these courses to move up the ladder, social mobility, are they more likely to take those courses versus the free course? And what's the value of that extra certification and so forth? So there's a lot of interesting questions that we can ask around that. So if you're interested in either of those topics, you can talk to Chris and Tawana, because we just got these grants. We haven't got the money yet. But those are 2 of the specific projects we're going to do with this data. So I think I'm officially out of time for those of you who have to leave at 1 o'clock. But we have, for those of you who don't, we can stay longer and talk about this more if you like. Thank you.
Okay, Connie. Okay. The data show that the MOOC users are happier with the instructor than with the interactive portions of the course. But Tim may know, my impression is that some other universities' courses have real training and involvement to try to improve the interactive components.
I'm not sure what other universities are doing as far as that goes. I would think some do. I can tell you that one of our huge peers does essentially nothing to help with that. They give them 50. They don't even help them produce the courses.
Who is that?
I don't want to say, but I'll talk to you private if you want. But they don't even help them with video production at all. Nothing. And they basically say, here's money, go make the course. They have to do this.
Yes, great. So this may be a question for Steve and Eric. How messy is the data? I mean, like from an analytics standpoint, what was it like to work with this massive amount of data that you didn't get to create the instrument?
I'm going to speak from my perspective, and Eric can speak from his, because I'm coming from the perspective that I've dealt with Sakai data for about 10 years now. So in that regard, it's actually somewhat cleaner because they had analytics in mind when they designed the interface, so it actually captures things a little bit more cleanly. And there's also and even though the amount of data is much more, the amount of tools is much, much, much less. So instead of dealing with 30 different tools with different events and different types of data, we're dealing with about 6. However, we're also still dealing, while it's at a massive scale with 81 partners, it's also a startup. So the way the data looked for the first batch of classes last fall versus how they changed for winter versus how they're going to change again probably for what happened in summer and the intricacies of what happens per session gives Eric's headaches.
Eric, do you want to just say a word about the code that you developed and distributed and why it was useful?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So let me think. So I guess like the Coursera data by itself, like once you wrap your once you like wrap your head around like how the Coursera data tables are exported to you, you can kind of like that's fine because everything is in one format. I think the hard part was actually merging the survey data, which is something else. So a lot of interesting stuff like the qualitative stuff that you can use in addition to the Coursera information. That's hard to merge together. Also, like the IP address, like basically for Coursera, a user is just an email address and an IP address. There's really not much you can get out of it. We actually had to merge the IP addresses against some other database, which takes several hours to run. Maybe I could have better code for that, but stuff like that.
Yes. So I'm curious about the discussion forum and if other institutions or even here there is has been an attempt to have kind of that. Well, this is going to sound like I'm inclined a certain way, but like a more substantive or more a follow-up with the course, right? Actual kind of, discussions with people or groups formally as part of the course. Has that ever been tried here or at other institutions? Do you know that they're trying to kind of complement or bridge the traditional with these?
So some faculty have done Google Hangouts, and we're doing some stuff with that where we gather questions from the discussion forums beforehand and then have a Google Hangout and answer some of those questions, and then also field some live questions at the same time. It's very dependent on the faculty member. The thing to understand about the discussion forums is that it is extremely chaotic. I mean, you'll have sometimes 100 threads about the same topic, and people aren't even realizing that other people are having these parallel conversations. And so it's really, really difficult to manage. I mean, even when, the student assistants put 10 hours a week into managing the discussion forums, and that's still not even a drop in the bucket to what you could spend.
I was going to add to that question. I attended Google I/O, which is kind of Google's major conference, and Google's working on creating a platform to allow for more social engagement. So the Google Hangouts, there are also office hours that they're trying to promote, as well as there are meetup groups that happen locally. I guess we don't have we're not able to follow up with that directly, but there are some meetup groups that are being created around
the MOOCs that are available.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
some
we
of
will-
that, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Some of that's also, as Tim mentioned, depending on the lecture, the instructor. So probably the one who does a lot of that is Chuck Severance, and he actively puts on the announcements that week where he's traveling. And so I just got an email this morning that he's doing local office hours in California this weekend. Come stop by a coffee shop and meet Chuck and talk about the class.
He's pretty unique in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody else that does that. One trouble that we'll have with data is if you have a Facebook meetup group or something, you would take it outside of Coursera, we can't know it other than doing what we did here, which is in the survey saying, look, are you hanging out with anybody and talking about the course material? And so far we can see that's not really happening for our MOOCs, for the people who choose to respond to our survey.
Anecdotally, I think that Dan mentioned this last week too, and we've had anecdotally the same thing, that students will make Facebook groups or private groups about the class, and then the instructor might actually say, like, can I join? And they'll say no. So students are leveraging all sorts of different. We actually had some follow-up survey questions also about tools, but because the numbers of students actually doing that, at least on our survey, is so low, we didn't share that today. But
we also had some major problems with copyright violations via Facebook, and Facebook will not do anything about copyright violations unless the requests for takedown come from the rights holders. And we couldn't get in and can do anything about the discussion forum, so we couldn't even take down these BitTorrents to textbooks for the introduction for this course.
Other questions? Anyone else? Yes.
To comment, I mean, realistically speaking, in terms of discussion forums, that what makes it successful when in those, like online schools, is the interaction between the professor and the students. They're used for where, the student will ask a question to the professor, they'll post something, the professor pokes and prods them more to get them the next level of understanding. And so realistically speaking, unless you can have that in something like this, which obviously is so chaotic and so forth, it may not actually be successful in this format, because that's probably what is needed. I mean, you can see students go way off the map and, where it's not useful to anybody, that nobody even wants to look at it if you don't have some guidance there. So, I like the idea of having a discussion forum in something like this, but unless you give them the guidance, then I see why the scores are low, and it's probably not going to change.
One thing we've tried to do is we tried to create sub-forums that are very topical, so either broken down by the unit or, if necessary, broken down by the segment of the video, so that students are able to sort of congregate in a smaller area and discuss those topics, so it's not as scattershot. And one important thing to think about is that this is very much crowdsourced engagement. So it's the engagement amongst their fellow students, and usually they answer each other's questions, and that's where we try to intervene, is if they can't answer each other's questions and the questions get a lot of votes and a lot of views, then we know that we need a definitive answer from the faculty member. So, and that's another reason why we try to use students who are subject matter experts. In some areas, Introduction to Thermodynamics, both of the students are subject matter experts, and they were able to answer most of the questions that the students had without even needing to go to the professor. So it's very variable. Where you have problems with the discussion forums is frankly with classes where it's more ambiguous content and it's all open to interpretation, and then people fight a lot about what's right and what's not.
Yes.
Hi. I just got, I think, the survey from you guys to fill out, which I haven't filled out because I did Scott's course over this summer. And so I haven't looked at your questions, but I'm really interested in trying to understand to what degree does the institutional affiliation with the course matter. In other words, as you're trying to understand initial interest in a particular, why did somebody choose this course? To what degree does it matter that it's being offered by the University of Michigan through Coursera?
You just wrote some new survey questions for us.
The question of like brand and branding is not unimportant. I think
No.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of the exploring ourselves. There was an article that came out, I think around 5 or 6 months ago, from researchers that were looking at Udacity and edX, and they found that by and large, that students remember who their instructor is, they don't remember the brand. So
And this can be some of Chris's project too, looking at that. The branding will be important, the connection. But yeah, I think, and you saw that they love the instructors, and that it was for Michigan they rated highly, but not as highly as they rated the instructors. So please take our survey.
My suspicion is that I don't think it matters that much. Like you saw from these numbers, like we only had like 941 out of like the 600,000 people that had UMich emails. And then also, like if you looked at the geographic location, only 4% were from Michigan versus the 21% for California. So those follow I think it's the population of that state that follows that pretty evenly.
Well, I mean, so Maya, just, I don't want to belabor this, but for example, when I look at some of the Coursera courses, I'm actually immediately attracted to whatever Stanford happens to be offering. So I go look at one of the Stanford courses. In other words, part of my interest is partly geared to Stanford, and that sort of Stanford's provided for a whole set of reasons. And I'm wondering to what degree to understand it if people are looking at courses offered by Michigan in the same way.
Right. Well, it's no coincidence that as soon as people like Stanford and MIT got in the MOOC business, that Michigan decided we need to get us some of that. But we've done it very cautiously and at a much more measured pace than some of these other institutions, because you can also dilute a brand, right? So I'm very happy that the students who've taken our courses are that happy with their course experience. That's good news. Yes?
Yeah, I just wonder, was there any consideration for students who might have registered for another course from a different institution comparing the effectiveness of those two different courses, or
If they're shopping and comparing? No, we can't know that. We get the Michigan data. What our contract with Coursera says is anything that happens in a Michigan course, we own the data for that. Now, we are establishing partnerships with a number of the other Coursera institutions, and one aspiration would be for a large combined data set where we could ask some of these questions, and even getting closer to your question, how likely are you to take a course at one of these institutions versus another? And also the nature of the courses are probably different. There's a big push by some of the lower tier institutions to offer these kind of gateway courses, the early intro to kind of courses that you might go to a place like a community college or another kind of online DeVry or Arizona, one of those other, to take that kind of courses. The courses we're offering tend to be courses that you might come to a place like Michigan or Stanford to take. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts, which is again another reason to have a larger combined data set.
We're at time, I think, but we can hang on.
1:15. So Steve, do you want me to close and comment?
No.
That was it.
I think that was it.